If you have a thing for quick-witted characters, strong woman voice, an honesty about uncertainty, and an interest in South Asia, I definitely have the book for you. Before I begin talking about A Gujarat Here, A Gujarat There by Krishna Sobti, I wanted to mark an incredible occasion. This week marks the 5th year anniversary and commemoration of the birth of the I Will Go Out movement. In 2016, there was a mass molestation in my city of Bangalore where I was working at the time. And in the process, because of one Facebook message from my dear friend Divya, it snowballed into one of India's biggest movements against sexual harassment and street safety in the country. 5,000 women, children, allies, people marched on the streets together across 30 different cities, villages, and towns, more than 30 different cities, villages, and towns, to march for the right and the access to the street. And I am so inspired. We connected with so many civil society organizations, dozens of them. There's now a rich network of feminists, and that network is here and it is strong. And I am so proud to be part of such an incredible movement. Please check it out. You can Google I Will Go Out. I will be dropping our Insta accounts, our Twitter handle, and our Facebook page, so you could check out I Will Go Out some more. Other accolades, because it's time for celebration. UN Women has called us one of the hashtags to watch, one of 12 hashtags in the world to watch for feminism, and also one of the hashtags of the decade. So I am really excited and inspired by my siblings in India who are doing incredible work every day, some of them risking their lives in fragile and conflict settings in Jammu and Kashmir. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. It is you all who really make the world a better place. I was gifted this book by Daisy Rockwell, who translated A Gujarat Here, A Gujarat There by Krishna Sobti. And let me tell you, it was beyond anything that I could have ever imagined. In the process, I was able to learn about a new author that I had no idea about, and also have a really exciting and interesting journey with the author in her own life of making sense of a very painful time. And at the end of the day, being resilient and finding her own way. In its bare bones, A Gujarat Here, A Gujarat There is part novel, part memoir about a moment in Krishna Sobti's life right after partition or during partition, in which she takes up a job from what becomes Lahore, Pakistan, to the state of Rajasthan, to Sirohi, which is a small kingdom, during the time of nation-state building between Pakistan and India, between highly contentious periods of understanding or the fate of the kingdom, really. And she finds herself right smack in the middle as the governess to the boy king of Sirohi, the Indian Union coming in and making a decision on whether or not his sovereignty and his rule is constitutionally legitimate, and whether he is going to be handed over, the kingdom to be handed over to Abhay Singh of Manadar. So you have a backdrop, a political backdrop and a turmoil to Sobti's story. One, you have partition. And what partition is during India and Pakistan's history, the British India or British colonized India was divided in half in 1947, and there were millions of people who were displaced on that border in the state of Punjab, and in the process, there was carnage and war, displacement of 10 to 20 million people, which is one of the largest movements and displacements in the history of the world. And in that experience, Muslims, Hindus, many minority groups as well, were persecuted and riots broke out. And she is one of those quote-unquote refugees, which I want to say as a side note, and we'll get into it, that she reflects on this, and there are quibs from her very sexist and problematic director / boss of the school before she becomes the governess, Two, you have this political turmoil also based off of the sovereignty of this princely state of this kingdom of Sirohi. And then lastly, you have all this rich identity politics. Who is an Indian? What is an Indian? What is a Pakistani? What are these arbitrary identities? What is Gujarat? What is Rajasthan? What is a Muslim? What is a Hindu? What does it mean to be a person in which your identity is now politicized and your identity isn't fluid and you are known by your refugee status? So here you have three elements, and here we have Krishna now coming to the kingdom of Sirohi in the beginning, and this is why I love her as a protagonist. She comes as mid-20 something, comes to this kingdom. It is very sleepy. She constantly questions, what am I doing here? Of all places, am I going to languish here? And there was a moment as a young professional, as a young person, where I could identify that feeling of questioning, of being stuck. And for her to make sense of that, and dealing with a boss, dealing with a director who is quite sexist, a little problematic, ethnicist, casteist, for her to navigate that, as well as her own trauma of seeing violence and experiencing violence. And she talks about how one of her childhood friends was hacked to death at her own wedding, which she ends up writing a short story about that later in her life. But that's where we find our protagonist, and how she is the governance now in the center of this political debate, working with the Boy King. And her mission professionally is to make sure that the Boy King is learning and reading and drawing and having manners, and then having all these adults managing behind the scenes. So it's a really exciting book. Lots of feelings of uncertainty, an electricity in the air, a friction that you can just sense through it. And then her stubbornness. Maybe the word is not stubbornness, her tenacity of just being true to herself and dealing with a really difficult situation. On top of this thickening plot, you also see and get glimpses of Sobti's philosophies and who she is and where she is and how she thinks about war and she thinks about pain, and just moments of really beautiful crystallized understandings of who she is and who her soul is. I want to read a section to you where she describes and makes sense of the violence of India. And remember in my first introduction, I said that books are an incredible space to understand governance and what is happening and the political context. Well, what I'm about to read to you, is exactly what I mean. All right. Hind Rao had sons, 4, Sio, Theo, Dio. Why bother naming the 4th? He was a Dalit meant to pick up the trash. Islamuddin had 4 sons, Arab, Pathan, Turk, Mughal. Sio awoke from a deep sleep and burped. Victory to Siaram, he cried. Theo got up, cleared his throat noisily, and yelled, Victory to Bajrang Bali. Theo got up, wiped himself down with a waistcloth, and growled, Har Har Mahadev. All 3 carried on, screaming into the air, Victory to Siaram, victory to Bajrang Bali, Har Har Mahadev. Then a voice. Why just your voice? Why not mine? If not mine, then not yours, and if not yours, then none. And each began to rupture the din of the others. They choked on another's voices from their throats. In the midst of this, Uncle Hind's son, Theo Khan, stood and whirled his mustache and began snarling in earnest, like a hawker or a muradar. Nara-i takbir ya Allah, Allahu Akbar. The voices pierced one another, turned to smoke, and began to bubble up among the populace. In a short while, red-yellow flames licked the sky. Leaping and jumping from house to house, they touched the heavens. Har Har Mahadev, victory to Bajrang Bali, victory to Sri Ram. Soon, dolls of flesh and bone began to burn, to ash, severed, half-burnt arms, torsos, necks lying in piles like old pieces of junk, lumps of flesh. Blood, blood, blood. Who is the killer? Who is the criminal? Who is the revolutionary? Enmity among friends is evil. Friendship among enemies also evil. But now all the friends and enemies are gone. When I read this section, I got goosebumps because honestly, looking at Indian history and being in India for work, very little has changed when it comes to riots. What they look like, how they manifest, the horror, the loss, the pain. Hundreds of years of history brought up in a single fraction, only for everything to be burned down. And reading this was just an understanding and a continuation in this aside during her novel, memoir, that the same generational traumas still persist in India. And I needed a minute after reading that section because, 1 year ago, the Indian government changed the constitution of who could be defined as a refugee, or attempted to, and those decisions were made on religious lines. So reading this, not in a vacuum of history and just thinking about it as a continuation, is really rich and powerful, and really grateful for this story. I also wanted to talk about the art of translation. How do you get the voice and the honest flavor of Krishna for her to come out in a tongue that is not hers, right? She's not writing in English. I'm reading in English because I can't read Hindi. So Daisy writes the challenge and also her journey of getting to know Krishna in the process and just verifying things and getting her story right. And I think the writing in this is so lyrical and beautiful and witty that I read this book in 2 days. I consumed it. So I want to make a note, a little note, and geek out about the translation. So beautifully done, Daisy. I absolutely loved it. And yeah, it's been a privilege to be able to review this book. Please let me know what you are all reading. Please drop in the comments. I'd love feedback. Do let me know if you would like for me to talk a little bit more about the political strife. Do let me know what you are reading, what you would like for me to read and to review. And yeah, thanks for joining me. Until next time, and keep on reading.